Hello, everybody, and welcome into a Thursday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo edition of the Unreasonable Odds podcast presented by DraftKings. I'm your host, Julian Edlow. You can find me on Twitter at Julian Edlow. You can find the podcast on Twitter at Unreasonable Odd, where, of course, we ran out of room for the S. And we have a guest coming on with us. Came on with us last year around NFL draft time and gave out some very, very helpful hints, I would say. Doug Kezirian, the host of Daily Wager on ESPN2, ESPN Sports Betting Analyst. You can find him on Twitter at DougESPN. Doug, how we doing?
Doing well. I chuckled when you mentioned that you couldn't do the S. I remember, reminds me of the old days when I hosted the Las Vegas Sports Line in Las Vegas with Matt Humans of VSiN and Adam Hill of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and we couldn't fit it all in. Then we did the LV Sports Line, but like that wasn't our website address, so it's just like this headache. Which are, I mean, look, they're first world problems in a lot of ways, but it is funny just the nuances of our racket, so to speak. So I just chuckled during when you said that. That was really funny.
When we rebranded this podcast probably about a little over a year and a half ago, and I came up with the name and I loved it. And then it didn't fit in the Twitter handle, and I was devastated, but we stuck with it. But the Twitter handle for this podcast and an S not fitting is not going to help people make any money betting on the NBA playoffs. So we will try and move on from there. You and I have been, talking often throughout the end of the NBA regular season and going into the playoffs, and generally on the same page with a lot of things. And I think we've both done very well, I think, early in the playoffs. But we were talking a little bit before we went on. I'm kind of your mindset that I have less opinions moving forward now as things start to tighten up, especially when we have the rest of these series, especially when we get to the conferences. And if we get like Suns Warriors and it's either Bucks and Celtics against the Heat, things really tighten up and it becomes much more difficult to find that edge. So it's starting to go away a little bit, but we still have the rest of these conference semis to go. And we got this off day in the NBA on Thursday. We get back to things, interestingly, on Friday with, the set of games we had on Wednesday play again in their game 3 before the Tuesday matchups get to their game 3s on Saturday. So a little bit weird scheduling by the NBA, but we have all those games, those 4 games on the board on DraftKings Sportsbook. The first one being Friday night, Miami at Philly. Miami's sitting as a 1-point favorite there, essentially a pick, minus 115 on the money line. I know the total Heat unders have been a big thing in the playoffs. They finally went over in game 2. That total creeps up a couple points to 210.5. It's tough to do anything here until we know what Embiid's status in these games in Philly is going to be. I've got Heat in the series. I've got the Heat laying a game and a half in the series. I feel confident that they'll probably split in Philly and have a closeout attempt in game 5 in Miami. What's your take on game 3 and the rest of the series here, I guess?
Yeah, I think gentleman's sweep is the logical approach. I just think, look, by nature, bettors have FOMO, right? And so our biggest fear in this Sixers game is like to not lay the Heat -1 and then Embiid's out and then it's like -4 or something. And I just think you have to like not beat yourself up in those situations. Just let it go. Like you don't have an edge in terms of you don't have the pipeline of the information. You just should take a position. There's no sort of handicapping angle in terms of situational that gives you an edge. I just think you have to let it play out. Maybe get involved live, maybe a second half under or over or something like that. You just don't know what's going on with Embiid. And even if he does play, we don't know if he's 100%. Would he be greenlit if it's 1-1 in the series? So I just think you have to be very careful, not force it as much as you're itching, and then it's an island game, meaning it's the only game on at the time. We've all been there. I sympathize with everyone. Just let's not force it. I think there's other ways to go about it. There's other maybe options on the board. But I think no one with a clear mind can really fire on game 3 without knowing anything.
Yeah, I'm with you there. We got to wait and see. However, I don't think I'm going to bet Philly any game in this series regardless. I'm either going to lean Miami or play Miami, it feels like, because they have just been all over them. And that's going to change with Embiid. Like it has to. He's a mismatch for anyone. But how healthy will he be when he does return?
Well, I think if he's ruled out, like I think the Heat are a play, even playing more points, right? So like it's -1 right now, I believe. So I would lay like 3.5, 4 if he's a late scratch. Because I do think, and maybe I play amateur psychologist a little too much, but I do think there's the dejected component to the Sixers. I think Harden not being MVP Harden and everyone else just missing shots or whatever. Maxey can only do so much. The bigs are limited. I think Heat as a type of team can smell blood. Maybe Lowry's back after a few days off, so that could help. But I just think this Miami team can hit you in waves. I definitely think they have their warts. They're not like a dominant one seed, but they're also not a farce either. They're very good. I just haven't. I think I'm scarred emotionally from the regular season because they had so many guys in and out, and then I never knew when I could trust them when they'd show up. I mean, they lost at home not too long ago against Philly without both Embiid and Harden.
Right.
So there's just things, and that's the regular season. Everyone has those eggs that they lay. But I just never got a real clean vibe and feel for handicapping the Heat because so many guys were out in and out of the lineup. And then some of these other guys like Strus and Vincent are almost like late bloomers in the season. So I just don't have a clear read. And then the handicapping in me from all these years of NBA, it's just tough that the one seed's going to cover both game 1 and game 2 because obviously the Sixers started strong, and that's what I was expecting. I laid it, but it was just like a reluctant a bet. So I just don't have a good read on this, but I think if Embiid's a late scratch, I think the Philly fans will turn quickly. I think they're just dejected because their stud is out, and it's just like, here we go again in terms of bad luck.
Yeah, and I mean, Miami took 30 whatever it was from Maxey in that game too, and still wound up blowing them out. So I'm with you on the majority of what you just said. And you're right, Miami's a weird one seed because they don't have the Giannis or the Tatum or the Embiid that the other 3 teams alive in the East do have. But what they do have is ridiculous balance with those guys that they do play. And then the late bloomer, like Gabe Vincent and Max Strus, were not even names at the beginning of the season. Now they're major contributors in this rotation, not to mention knock the cobwebs off Victor Oladipo, and he is like a real piece right now, coming on at the right time. So incredibly balanced for Miami. We'll see how that series shakes out, and we'll see. I mean, it all comes down to just Embiid's status in these games before we're locking anything in. So this is probably the hardest series to talk about at the moment. Friday nightcap is Phoenix. Series transitions to Dallas now for a game 3. Suns, like the Heat, covered both home games. 2 totally different games, though. Game 1 was a blowout that the Suns had the whole way, led by as many as 21, and then just barely covered on the back door with Doncic going nuts. But the game was never in question. Game 2 went the other way. Dallas came out. Luka was hot in the first half. They were contending in the game. They had the lead at halftime. And then Chris Paul just dominated the fourth quarter. When he went to the bench, Devin Booker kind of put the dagger in with a few threes, and it turns into a Phoenix blowout out of nowhere. This one is essentially the same number. It's a pick 'em for game 3 in Dallas. I think that Dallas should show some life in this series. I just don't know when or if I'm going to bet them. But the Suns at home are tough, and I think they can struggle in one of these road games, especially with Doncic maybe going nuts at home.
Seeing it the same way, I was leaning up to a play last night, slept on it this morning more and more. I'm warming up to it. I'm actually pretty eager to fire. I'm going to go Mavs first half, not first quarter. We see attacks sometimes on teams down 0-2 coming home, like where they're favored by more in the first quarter than they are the game. Yep. Oddsmakers kind of figured that out in 2015, I want to say. I don't think we see that. Although Luke, I believe, does play the entire first quarter. So if you wanted to do that, I couldn't fault you at all.
That's the one thing I was going to say. When you're deciding between quarter and halves, you do what's the rotation, and Luka does get rotation. More first quarter minutes. But then again, I'll remind you, you know this, the game 2 Heat plays I put out first to 10 and first to 15 because of DeAndre Jordan's minutes in the rotation. He came out of that game 1 4 minutes in at 15-6, and it bit me. They lost to 10-15, and then they won to 20, as you know.
Yeah, no, it comes down to
stuff.
It's not overthinking. So basically, I want people to understand: if you flip a coin 100 times, you're more likely to get the true outcome of 50-50 than if you flip it 4 times. Okay, it's just very simple. So the larger a sample size, the more likely the true outcome. So if you believe in like the concept of like the strong start or whatever, you want to play a longer sample. Now it's all about which angle and how much, to your point, how much DeAndre Jordan matters or whatever. So I'm just going first half because I think the Suns have like a formula to beat him, they're going to let him expend energy in the first half because he has
Yeah.
all those ISOs and he goes nuts. I think he kind of hits a wall by the second half, and then they were picking on him in the pick and roll. I don't think they're going to do it from the start all series. I think that they're going to go to it when they need to, preferably when he's tired, because I don't know if he's in shape. I mean, he is a bigger, like stronger guy, and then he had trouble playing himself into shape earlier this season. So I'm just guessing that's sort of the approach that Phoenix is taking. So is there an edge? I don't know. I think strong start role players play better at home. You got to get more from Brunson, got to get more from Dinwiddie, and then guys like Dwight Powell won't be in foul trouble. You would think. I thought some of the shooters like Bertans, I mean, that he gave him what you thought. That's house money right there. I just, if you're going to look to play it, I think you play Mavs first half and hope for the best.
I'm with you there because there's got to be a spot that Dallas gets it at home, and generally the most desperation is right when you get home, down 2-0, and you kind of got to have it then. And I do like your take on Luka a lot. I think you're exactly right, and I think those of us that watched the entirety of Game 2 see exactly what you're referencing in terms of let him have it early, tire him out, and then at the end of that game, Chris Paul was feasting on him in those pick and rolls. So yeah, I do like the first half take on Dallas for Game 3 coming home. Series wise, you got anything on the series? Is there still anything playable in the series? Suns
No,
what do we got?
I have Booker to win MVP of the finals.
Okay.
At like some 6.5 to 1. I haven't looked at the market, but I as Chris Paul, as great as he's been, I think Booker gets MVP if they win it all. I just think he's such a more. I mean, Barkley's talked about it on the broadcast. When you're 36 and he'll be 37 in a day or so, it's really hard to play elite games back to back. It's just the consistency component. We saw that with Big Ben during the regular season, which I know is a random comparison, but Big Ben's like peak this last season was actually pretty good, right? He had some big games against the Ravens, but then he had some stinkers. It's just now Chris Paul's been very different what he did in the fourth quarter. But remember that game where they went to halftime and he was sucking wind, he was dripping with sweat, and the announcers are like, Chris Paul's exhausted. I think they were up 10. Like he barely played in the second half. They monitored his minutes. So I think there's a reason there's like value on both of those guys because like Giannis basically MVP odds are the same as the Bucks. Right.
Tatum would. I mean, Tatum, Brown is good, but Tatum would be the guy.
Right. Although they made a mistake at the beginning of the playoffs. Celtics were around 8 or 9. Tatum was 16 to 1. I thought that was ridiculous. But I really think you're getting good value on Booker because last year Chris Paul became the finals favorite, and then Booker had a monster game. I think they had a turnover in that game, but if they win, he becomes the favorite. So I just think Booker's more likely to have 4 good games, whereas Chris Paul could get it. But again, you're getting huge value compared to the Suns title odds. So that's the only thing I would look at playing because I do think the Suns are polished and much more reliable than the Warriors. I think the Warriors peak is a little bit better than the Suns, but I don't know if you're going to get that for 4 games and 4 wins. Suns have home court. I would play the Booker if it's at the right price in terms of the futures. But this series, I don't know. I don't think I can lay it. I mean, you can lay 2.5 and hope that the Suns get 1 game and then finish it off and you get a gentleman's sweep.
Yep. All right, the Saturday afternoon game. Celtics evened it up with the Bucks in a gotta have it game 2 at home. Kind of just no questions out of the gate before you can take a sip of your drink. It was like 18-3 Celtics, and they slowed down in the second half, but they held on, got it done with pretty good margin. Jaylen Brown looked good off battling through the hamstring injury, although he slowed as well. Really the key for them, I think, is how, I mean, the shots will go in if the shots go in. They're going to take their threes, and we see if they make them. It comes down to how they choose to defend Giannis, and what they chose to do that made the difference in game 2, I think, was in game 1, Giannis had the 12 assists. 9 of them were for made 3-pointers by the Bucks. In game 2, they played him a little more straight up, and Grant Williams and Al Horford might not be quite as fortunate against him in games in Milwaukee, but they did well enough where the other guys couldn't really get going, and they did what they needed to do. The 1 of 10 start from Giannis he got going in the third, but it was kind of over by then. This is by far the most competitive series. I don't think anybody is gonna debate that. Milwaukee now a 3-point favorite on Saturday afternoon. In Boston, all of the games have gone well under. A team has ended each game in the 80s so far. 213 total. Let's just start with game 3 before moving on to anything for the series. Bucks bounce back at home, Bucks first half, but it's 1-1. It's a different scenario.
So I was all over the Celtics in game two. And I
Same.
sat there on air and I said, look, it's just one of the things about betting the NBA. Sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith. There's nothing we have seen from Milwaukee the last few games to think that they're going to get smoked. But that's just the way it goes. And, then you hear the reports afterwards, like Jaylen Brown was out this afternoon shooting jumpers and there's just a crispness to the team, a more desperate team down 0-1. And there's a little bit of a relaxed component to the team up 1-0. We saw it in the first round against the Bulls. And the loose balls, and also the Celtics in game one had the worst shooting percentage on uncontested twos in the entire postseason. And then they had a really ridiculous percentage of threes on uncontested looks. So there was just bound to be some regression there. So now situationally, that was obviously all Celtics, no brainer. This one, I don't know. And I don't think you can play it. You touched on the total. I think you have to play the under here.
Yep.
I think we got teased a little bit with the Celtics shooting against the Nets because that Brooklyn defense, although that played better than we probably gave it credit for or assumed, it's still the Brooklyn defense, a lot of open looks. And they also just hit a lot of shots, like Tatum, Brown, Grant Williams, Smart. They hit a million shots contested, especially in that closeout game. I was really impressed with Brooklyn's effort and even the Celtics to outlast them. Milwaukee hit shots. Their offense wants to score, based just on looking at it, before the Celtics half-court defense sets up. I think they want threes in transition. Then they'll rely on Giannis, and Giannis is Giannis, and he'll score. I think you have to play the under. I think the physicality of both teams, and just the length, particularly of Milwaukee, when you have Giannis and Drew Holiday, and I know Middleton's not in, but just now Lopez is a rim protector. I just think 213. I mean, you're going to get one team, like you said, really be struggling, and I think you have to play the under. I don't think you can play a side. I guess Milwaukee you can make a justification, but I don't know, man. I don't think you can just assume they bounce back.
Yeah, this is a tough series, and that's why it's hard to play. I would, maybe the loser of game 3 is the play in game 4.
Perhaps. Maybe Smart comes back if Boston loses or something,
Yeah, we gotta see how that all looks. It depends how game 3 goes. Series wise, are you in on anything already on it, or is there anything at this point that
I have Tatum 16-1, so I have a rooting interest in that. And I didn't bet enough. I should have just max bet the heck out of that thing, but. The East was super competitive this year, right? It's not like a 3-horse race like it usually is. I think.
When you were betting it, this was before the Brooklyn
right before
series,
the playoff start.
So people at the time, that was a coin flip series. I'm doing air quotes. It turned out to be a sweep.
Yeah, no, totally. And so you mentioned earlier, as the playoffs go on, it's harder. For me, friends have jokingly called me the betting bully. I'm all about if there's a really bad team, just fade it or whatever. I think when it gets late in the postseason, these lines are tight, man. You're not going to see some blowouts.
Yeah.
And it's going to come down to some free throws. I'll set up some middles with live wagering just because the NBA is still pretty volatile. But you got to be careful because these are really good teams, and you can give me a road record. You can give me a team off a loss record. You can do all that, but it really doesn't apply. I said this for the national championship game in college football. The books did props for the first time on a lot of guys, right? The national championship game, they didn't do them on a lot of Saturdays on some of these guys. And you don't really know what's going to happen. You can give me Georgia's wide receiver stats against Vanderbilt, against Mississippi State, against all these, but Alabama, Georgia is just a different animal. And we saw that in the SEC championship game. It was a very different game plan. And obviously Bama surprised them. And then the reverse happened in the championship game, the national championship game. But I just think I don't care what a team's road record is when it comes to the postseason, because their opponent and them are on the same travel schedule. It's the same off day. It's just and the stakes are so much higher. It's just such a different animal that you just have to kind of apply your playoff handicapping acumen and almost throw out a lot of the stats. I don't care what Memphis ATS during the regular season was this year. I really don't. Their advantage and the reason they were so good and the best of the NBA is because they brought it every night and they were just intense and treated the regular season. Every year there's 3 teams or 2 or 3 teams that treat the regular season like it's the NBA Finals every night. The Grizzlies were one of them, and they were so deep and that depth was huge. And the Warriors were banged up and stuff, and people citing what Golden State's been ATS the last 3 months. I don't care. Steph missed half of that. So this lineup, and especially as they go as the death lineup 2.0, it's just a different animal, and you have to really apply, like I said, your playoff knowledge and things along those lines. And this one's obviously matchup dependent, and we'll see what happens. I don't think Bane's going to get suspended, but you just never know. Excuse me, not Bane, Dylan Brooks. Right? Yeah, and I think the situation, like you said, I really like Golden State to just open up a can.
Right. So let's get into Memphis and Golden State. And you mentioned the way that Memphis played this season and how they played so well. Part of that reason is how well, as you know, they start games. They score to start games. And you have been one of the people riding that Grizzlies first quarter team total train. I hopped aboard that in early February, started putting it out a few times, and
yeah, it's been
just
insane.
kind of snowballed, and here we are. I do not think I'm going to play it in game 3 on Saturday night in Golden State. So yeah, Kerr publicly says that's a dirty hit essentially with Brooks, and not only did it just knock Peyton out of the game, he's now out 3, 4, 5 weeks with a fractured elbow. So a serious hit to a role player that was coming on and helping the Warriors a bit. I'm not going to say it plays a role in this series, but he's helped them win some games in the playoffs. Warriors 6.5-point favorites, minus 275 money line, total set at 226.5. This is going to, I've already used the Warriors money line as a parlay piece with some heat with those games that are already wrapped. So I need Golden State to win this one. I think they will, but I think there's an angle early here, whether it's and I haven't figured it out yet, whether it's Golden State first half, first quarter, to come out at home and play with a little bit of extra juice and ferocity after the Brooks hit on Peyton, coming home Saturday night off a loss that, by the way, was you took 47, 8, and 8 from Morant. You shot 18% from 3 on the road, and you had a chance to win that game if you don't get that phantom foul call on who else but Scott Foster on Draymond towards the end of that game. So interesting. The Warriors could have won that game and did not. This spot screams Warriors, and I know you feel the same, but tell me how you're thinking about playing.
So I got a little nervous. We were taping the pod because I did text someone their thoughts on games because they've been pretty sharp the last few games, and he said, I kind of think Memphis wins the series. He goes, I'm almost ready. And I was like, no way, because I laid the 320 yesterday, after what's 1-1.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Memphis has a shot. They just don't have the horses, right? Again, regular season they do. I just think Golden State's a different animal with the star power, the shooting ability. Poole and the Splash Brothers combined were 6 of 29 or something insane. And you hit
worse, I think.
Hit a couple threes and they win easily. And Morant's been great, and obviously he has to take some of the shots because they're sloughing off him so much. I just don't know where the Grizzlies are going to get their points if any of the shots are dropping for the Warriors. Give Memphis credit. I mean, they've gotten Clay putting the ball on the ground, and he's a catch and shoot shooter. But
yeah, Thompson was dreadful in game 2.
Dreadful, and the big travel too. So I just think the Warriors handle their business. I think they're too good. I think the difference that's helping them is that they're hungry because they've missed the playoffs the last couple of years. There was an element of spoiled and complacency that probably set in a little bit. Although when they got Durant, they were just unfair. So I it's hard for me to imagine the Grizzlies winning 3 of the next 5. But look, stranger things have happened. Grizzlies are obviously very good, but I laid the 320, 330 and some different shops. And I laid the 6.5 and money line. I have some money line parlay with you, I have the last night's games. I just think you have to take advantage of these situations. Really good team, off a loss. And then if you want to play back a little bit, but at some point you'll be able to protect that 6.5, take a plus 9.5, 10.5, or something like that.
Yeah, I'm with you here. This is a Warriors spot, and this is a spot where, because we made plenty of money in the regular season, we made some good money on early rounds when the matchups were more uneven. But like you said, now that we're getting later and there's going to be less and less of these situations and tighter lines, when we get one, I think this is where you want to get involved. So I'm with you. This is the game of the weekend in terms of a side for betting in NBA. And like you said, that last game, All you have to do is maybe Morant goes for 43 instead of 47, and Clay and Steph make one more three. The Warriors win by 5 or 6 points. It was that thin of a margin. So I don't think it's going to go very well for Memphis going back to Golden State for this Saturday night game, but we shall see. I'll probably go. I don't want to pick now, but I'm probably going to go first half over first quarter.
I was going to say first something. More. Yeah, no, first something sounds like right. I would say I would be careful betting into the first quarter with that team, but then like Timberwolves were dominant in a lot of the first quarters in the last round.
Right. So the Wolves went. I think the Wolves were 5-0 first quarter ATS. I forget who won the first quarter of game 6. All right, so that's the board that we got right now, but I just want to wrap with a couple of quick ones for you on stuff that you brought up during the podcast, but stuff that I know from our conversations that you bet, which is you mentioned both live middling and playing second halves. What are you looking for in game when you're doing some of those things? You can start with second halves because I know you like to play a lot of second halves. I play some of them. Like I did get involved in Suns in game 2, but I know that's something that you have your eye on a lot.
I do, and I would say in general, 90% of the totals I play are on unders. So I typically look to do an under, and I'm too stubborn with this. Like if I see a first half and it's like really low scoring and they'll put up like a 111.5, I'll bet the under second half, and it's the wrong thing. It's like regression, and then coaches make adjustments to change and improve what was slacking. It doesn't always happen. I mean, we've seen first half and second half go unders for sure. I take it on the chin sometimes too much like that. Like I see something and I think that's going to be the way of the entire game. With that being said, if there's a high scoring first half, typically second halves go under. Now the market adjusts too. Second half last night with Sixers Heat was only 102. And so I was hoping for like a 108, 109. I was going to jump on the under and I laid off. I actually tweeted out, should we be betting the over? Because right at the end of the first half, the Sixers went small, pushing the pace, getting their fingertips on a lot of balls, and then they were also giving up paint points. That they ended up doing that a little bit. They did go over the second half. Thank God they didn't put up a 108 or 109 because it landed like 111. But the second half did go over the 102 and a half. In general, you just kind of have to get a feel for it's almost like pattern behavior you watch. If you just watch enough of the NBA like I have over the last 3-4 decades, you just get a feel for things. Now, the NBA game has changed a lot. Obviously, the three-pointer and some of these totals, but you also have to incorporate the element of the playoffs, like measured possessions in the second half. Defense tightens up, particularly the fourth quarter. I'll do a lot of the fourth quarter unders. Now, Luka burned me in game 1 when they kept going for twos and like fouling, and then like I'm like, you cannot win if you do. You have one chance, and that's like a 3% chance. You have to shoot a 3 right now. Yeah. So that burned me late on some like stupid lay-ins with 30 seconds to go, but I think they're just like he wasn't thinking. He just like went through the motions. But for the most part, I do like the second half unders if there's been a high scoring game. Now, middles, I joke that there's like the scene in The Rock when like he's holding like the green like balls of the nuclear war, and he's like, the moment you disrespect it is you're dead. It's like that's what happens in like live betting. Like the moment you don't like really focus and take like precaution, things can get away from you and it can get ugly.
Yeah.
So if you just ask yourself, if a line's like -4, will you get a better line, either side, favorite or underdog, at some point during the game? I haven't logged this, but I would guess about 90% of NBA games at some point will offer a better line for each side, whether it be +4.5 or better.
That's exactly what I was just going to say, and that's the number that I would be so curious to know, because if you do look at live betting lines, and some people that haven't looked tell me how shocked they are by this, and I've just been doing it for so long that it just it just makes sense to me. People are stunned at like how much movement there is, and there's always the numbers that are available in game are insane.
Yeah, I mean, look, if a team that's favored by 7 is up like 5 after the first quarter, they're going to be like 8.5 for the game. Just like they budget how much time is remaining and the current score.
Right.
And if you see things like foul trouble or injuries or stuff like that, like Luka walking to the locker room, like there's times where you can catch him sleeping. But for the most part, I like creating middles, because if you take a step away, we're all kind of idiots if you think about it. We are betting money on a game, and we handicap it and we break it down and all that stuff. And the last, I don't know, 5% of all these games are played so differently than the first 95%. I mean, just like hockey, like goalies are pulled. What are we doing? Right? That's a different game. You can talk about the power play numbers. Then you're like, what the hell? And then football, you have like the prevent defense, you have the chuck and duck offense, all this crazy stuff. And meanwhile, you've talked all week about breaking down all the stuff that doesn't happen in the last 2 minutes, right? And then the basketball, you have the chuck and duck 3-pointers, you have the fouling and all that stuff. So here we are sitting, breaking down Suns, Warrior, all this, and then it comes down to these free throws, and often comes down to these free throws. So my whole thing is, I'd rather have 20-1 odds on this nonsense at the end of the game than I will minus 110. So you might be asking at home, where do you get the 20-1 odds? Okay, so if you lay we'll use half points. Okay, so we'll lay 4.5, and then at some point you can take plus 7.5. You cannot lose both if you do the same amount on each. You can.
That's the first piece to know.
You can win both. So what's the worst you can do? Well, the worst you can do, 4.5, 7.5, because there's no pushes, is you lose 10% of one of your bets. That's the absolute worst you can do. So let's say it's 110 to win 100. So let's say the worst you can do is lose 10. The best you can do is win 200.
Right.
So thus, you created a 20-1 prop. And that's essentially what they do on Wall Street, derivative traders. They create contracts that aren't offered, like they create their own contracts. So I don't think a book at the beginning of the game will say, hey, if the favorite wins by 5, 6, or 7, we'll give you 20-1 odds. That's not going to be on the board. It's going to be like plus 210 or something. And so you absorb risk, meaning you take a position on one of those, like minus 4.5. And then during the game, you can take plus 7. So you absorb the risk, get a little dicey, but then you have a 20-1 shot on some free throws at the end of the game. Now, certain numbers are more valuable than the others. We know that in the NFL, key number 3, right? So the NBA, 5 is the most common margin of victory the last like 5 years or so. It goes 5, 7, 6, then like 4. So 5, now 5 being the most key number, it doesn't mean it's the same quality of key number as like the NFL has 3. Right. These are smaller differences between 5 and 7, and then like 3 and 7, right? But it's good to know that 5 is sort of that strike zone, right? 5, 6, 7. You saw a dribble out the other day, Memphis with Zaire Williams didn't shoot the layup, that landed 5. I had a couple around that, things like that. So those numbers are more valuable than like a minus 11. Like last night I had some Heat minus 8, 7.5, and then 8, and then also I took back like 11.5. Those numbers aren't as good because that's like really garbage time when you're like the scrubs are at the end. And it was like there was a steal when it was 13 in the ball, then they steal it and get the hoop and harm. Caleb Martin. I mean, trust me, like I lost on like plus 15, plus 30. If you have wide enough middles at like those teens, then it's fun. And it also, you can do this like second half too. So if there's less time left, those windows for the middle are much more valuable, right? Yep. Think about it. There's 3 minutes left in the game, although they're not going to put up live line. Like 6 minutes to go in the game versus like 3.5 quarters. Obviously, you're more likely to hit the window when it's later in the game because there's fewer possessions remaining. Also, don't forget, it's not just 20-1. Sometimes there's less juice. It'll be like minus 0.5. And you're like, whoa, okay, I'm now getting like 40-1 if you get minus 0.5 both sides, or 0.8. And then you start getting wider, payouts and longer odds. And then you're more likely to take minus 5 plus 6.5 or something like that. You can get two key numbers. And if you're getting minus 0.6 each side or something like that, there's ways to do it where you can get really, now it can be frustrating. Like, let's say I had the Heat, right? I played it all back. Like second half, I grabbed some plus 10s, minus 0.5, and I played some 11.5s. I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't like what I was seeing. And then the Heat blow them out. I'm kicking myself like, oh, I had this great number. But that's just the nature of the beast. If you are committed to the cause, so to speak.
I was going to say, I think what people are most afraid of is that they now have a good bet. They have minus 4.5 and the live line's 8.5. And they're like, well, I already have a good bet. I don't want to give that up. And the one thing I say to them is if you're betting 110 to win 100 on that game, then maybe go 55 to win 50 on that. You're not giving up all your good bet. You're giving up half of it, and you open up a partial window there.
Right. Or if you just think it's going to come down to like, you're like, don't like your situation and it's fourth quarter, like I'll just eat juice. I'll be like, let's say I'm minus 6 and there's up 6 at the current line with 7 minutes to go in the game. I'll just take plus 6, abort my bet, live to fight another day.
Yep.
And to your point, you don't have to do all of it either. You can do portions of it. My thing is, I'm just going to try to use round numbers. Let's say I'm a $100 bettor or $50 bettor. $50 bettor is better. So, but I'll be like, I'm going to bet 500 at minus 4 and play it all back. And then the juice I could lose will be 50. So I'm essentially going to make this a $50 wager, right? So I'll bet 550 to win a 500 minus 4.5, then plus 7.5 later in the game at 550 to win 500. And then so I can lose 50, but I can win 1,000.
With the part being that you got to get that window.
Right. But here's the thing. Let's say they blow them out and they win by 10 plus. And you're like, oh, I could have won 500. Don't beat yourself up. You never would have bet that original 500 if you were a $50 player without the intention of playing it all back. So going into it, you were never going to bet the 500 anyway. Now, if you bet 50, if you're a $50 player, and then late you want to like chop up your bet or whatever, then that's different because you've bet one unit. But in my example, I bet 10 units with the expectation of betting 10 units on the other side and not looking back.
Right.
And you would take that every time. Minus 4.5 plus 7.5 in every NBA game. You would take that literally blindly at 20-1 odds. So it takes a little playing games with yourselves. Like I said at the beginning, like you got to like be really focused, really aware of how it all goes down. But there is a method to the madness. It's fun. Hitting one of them. Remember, it's kind of like, your golf future. You got to only hit 1 out of 20 for it to pay for itself. Again, the juice changes, things like that. When there's fewer games left in the year, I don't get too cute. But what we were talking about earlier, fewer blowouts when it gets tight. The numbers, I think, are tighter with these teams. Like, I think the Milwaukee line in Celtics game would be a great game to middle. Like, lay a big position on Bucks -3. Take back 5. Like, there's no telling that thing can come down right to the wire. And it's not like a ridiculous foul in a closeout game just because they want to get the scrubs in or whatever in college, like the tournament. Only game 3. So that would be a way to play that game. If you're confident and you have the stomach to sweat out one side where you maybe bet too much or whatever, hoping that number comes back your way.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. People are just afraid to give up their position or afraid to lose too much, knowing that you can.
Totally. And I think that's smart. I totally think that's smart. There's an appetite for this. There's a fearlessness to it. And again, you don't have to overextend. You're like, do a 1 unit play, right? Do one unit. If you let's say you love the total, bet that, and then do also a unit on the side, I would say.
Yep. And I think I think what you said, to break even, you gotta cash this 1 out of 20 times.
In theory,
it's patience for people. They want to win their bet that day, versus, go 1-1 5 days in a row and then hit on the 6th day or the 7th day or whatever. And I get that, but
it's an option. It's an option in your portfolio. You can do it when you don't have a firm opinion. It's just like something to put in your arsenal.
Yep. I'm with you there. So there's your live betting tutorial from somebody that practices it quite often. All right. So I mean, that's probably going to do unreasonable odds. I know we talked a little beforehand, Doug. If you have any burning hot takes,
not really,
in the sports betting market, go ahead. Otherwise, we can wrap.
No, that'll do it. I mean, look, all of us see what the Reds are doing.
Yep.
It's hard not to bet against them run line or even on the Dodgers. All 14 of their wins have come run line.
Yeah.
Or 15 wins, I should say. So it's tempting. I would say keep an eye on those things. Don't be afraid. Like, these aren't like ridiculous trends. It's not like, oh, day games on Tuesday, like Reds are like historically bad. Like, don't be afraid. Odds makers are stubborn. They adjust late.
There you go. I mean, I think a lot of people are fading the Reds right now, and we're going to see how long this train can last, but it has been ugly so far. All right. So thank you to Doug for coming on. Again, find him on Twitter at DougESPN. Any particular content that you want to pitch while we're here? I think you guys have a Saturday.
Yeah. So
up,
we're
right?
Dark Friday. So we're on 11 a.m. Eastern on ESPN2. We're going to talk Derby, have some reports from Churchill Downs as well. We'll also look ahead to all the games, obviously the rest of the weekend. So that'll be fun. And then a lot of content right now on ESPN.com's chalk section. So tons of daily picks. We have videos as well. Just really fun. Like we're bringing our fantasy guys in, and they're really attacking the prop market, or at least explaining what's going on in the edges there. So it's a lot of good content in that regard.
All right, there you go. And of course, follow the podcast on Twitter at Unreasonable Odd Note S. Get all your articles on the DK playbook, and we'll be back most likely next week with more NBA playoff. I was going to say preview, but NBA playoff recaps, previews of the conference finals, wherever we're at that stage. And then I know Steve Buchanan, my co-host, will be back with me after that. We'll do a couple of MLB podcasts. We'll see if the Reds are still as historically bad as they are right now in a couple weeks. That is a podcast. Thank you for listening to Unreasonable Odds presented by DraftKings, and we will talk to you next week.